For 3,000 years, one oil has sat at the center of every Jewish kitchen, every Jewish ceremony, every Jewish prayer for healing. And almost no one today understands why. Not really. They think it is about the flavor. They think it is about the heart. They think modern science discovered it. But I wanted to tell you something this morning that will change the way you look at that small bottle sitting in your kitchen right now. What you have there is not a cooking ingredient. It is a vessel of ancient light. It is one of the most spiritually charged substances mentioned in all of sacred scripture. And the reason Jewish families who kept this oil at the center of their lives lived longer, thought more clearly, and carried a kind of inner peace that the world around them could not explain. That reason is encoded in texts that have been sitting in plain sight for 30 centuries. My name is Rabbi Shlomo Katz. I am 71 years old. I was born in Tzfat, Safed, the sacred city of the Kabbalah in the north of Israel, where the stones themselves hold the memory of the greatest mystical minds in Jewish history. I studied at the yeshiva of Tzfat and later at Bar Ilan University. But the education that changed my life came not from any institution. It came from my grandfather, Reb Yosef Katz, a master Kabbalist of the school of Tzfat, who sat with me at his kitchen table from the time I was a small child, and taught me that every food God placed on this earth carries a spiritual code, a dimension of meaning that goes far beyond nutrition. I have spent 43 years studying that code in Torah, Talmud, and Zohar. And today I want to share with you what those texts reveal about this oil, this ancient, sacred, misunderstood oil, and why the families who used it the way the tradition intended did not merely cook with it. They were changed by it. After 43 years of study, I have identified 7 foods that appear again and again across Torah, Talmud, and Zohar as carriers of divine blessing. They are the Shivat HaMinim, the 7 sacred foods of Israel mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8. Wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. 7 foods, 7 dimensions of blessing. Today I'm teaching you about one of them, the olive and the oil it gives. But I want you to understand from the beginning that what I am sharing today becomes 10 times more powerful when practiced alongside the other 6. Toward the end of this teaching, I will share something my grandfather only told members of our family, a practice with this oil that he said the Kabbalists of Tzfat had quietly maintained for generations. Stay with me. If you have ever wondered why so many traditional Jewish families seem to carry a particular kind of vitality, a particular sharpness of mind, even into old age, write the words Shivat HaMinim in the comments right now, because what I am about to share will answer that question in a way no doctor or nutritionist ever has. I did not learn about olive oil from a medical journal. I learned it from my grandfather's hands. He had a way of handling the olive oil in his kitchen that I did not understand when I was young. He would never take it from a plastic bottle. He stored it in dark glass, away from light and heat, and he would sometimes hold the bottle for a moment before pouring it, not dramatically, not in a way that called attention to itself. Just a brief pause, a quiet awareness, the way you might hold something you know to be precious before you use it. When I was perhaps 9 years old, I asked him why he did that. He looked at me and said, "Shlomo, this oil was used to light the Menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, the holy temple. It anointed the kings of Israel. It was pressed from the fruit that carries the name of peace in every language. When you hold it, remember what it is. Do not treat it like something ordinary, because it is not ordinary." I was a child. I filed that away the way children file things, not fully understanding, but knowing it mattered to him. It was only years later, deep in my study of Tractate Menorah in the Talmud, and then in the Zohar, that I understood what he was pointing toward. The olive oil used in the temple, described in Exodus chapter 27, verse 20, as shemen zayit zach, pure beaten olive oil, was not simply a fuel. According to the Zohar, the light of the menorah was a reflection of the Or Ein Sof, the infinite divine light, made manifest in the physical world through that oil. The oil was the vessel, and the vessel matters. What I did not realize as a child, and what most people today do not realize, is that the tradition surrounding olive oil in the Jewish home was not separate from the temple practice. It was a continuation of it. The same reverence, the same intentionality, the same understanding that what we bring into our bodies and our homes carries either blessing or its absence, depending on how we approach it. Most people alive today are suffering from something the ancient texts would recognize immediately, a collapse of vitality that is not simply physical. Yes, we see the statistics. Rates of cognitive decline are rising. More than 6 million Americans currently live with Alzheimer's disease, and that number is projected to nearly double by the middle of this century. Inflammation-related conditions, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders are at historic highs. But the crisis the Talmud would identify is not just in the body. It is in the relationship between the person and their food. The tradition teaches that a human being does not merely consume food, they receive it. And how they receive it, with what awareness, with what intention, within what framework of meaning, determines, at least in part, what that food can do. I know this from my own life in a way that embarrasses me to admit. There was a period in my 30s when I was working intensively on a major research project, traveling constantly, eating quickly, eating without thought, eating whatever was convenient. I stopped treating meals as moments of meaning. I told myself I was too busy for that kind of attention. Within 2 years, I had developed persistent fatigue. My concentration was poor, and I had recurring digestive problems that no treatment fully resolved. My grandfather was still alive then. When I visited him in Tzfat and he saw the state I was in, he did not say a single word about my diet. He asked me one question. When did you last say a bracha, a blessing, and mean it? Not recite it. Mean it. I did not have an answer. Within weeks of returning to the practices he had taught me in childhood, including a deliberate, intentional return to olive oil at the center of my meals prepared with the full awareness he had modeled, my body began to recover. I am not saying the blessing healed me. I am saying the intention changed how I lived inside my own life. And that changed everything. The modern world has reduced olive oil to a health product. And it is a health product. The science on that is extensive and real. But somewhere, in making it a product, we stripped it of its context. We removed it from the framework of meaning that gave it its full power. What the sacred texts reveal is that olive oil is not simply good for you. It is a bridge. It is one of the 7 divine foods, the Shivat HaMinim, that the Torah identifies as the inheritance of the people of Israel, and, through them, a gift to any household that receives it with the proper understanding. The olive, zayit in Hebrew, is one of the Shivat HaMinim, the 7 sacred foods of Israel named in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 8. Wheat, barley, the grape, the fig, the pomegranate, the olive, and the date. This list is not incidental. The Talmud in Tractate Bereshit, in a lengthy discussion of blessings and food hierarchies, explains that these 7 fruits carry a unique sanctity, because they are specifically associated with the land of Israel, and, through that association, with divine providence itself. When you eat these foods, you are participating in a covenant that goes back to Sinai. But the olive holds a particular place even within this sacred group. It is the only one of the 7 whose product, the oil, was used in every dimension of temple service. It lit the menorah. It anointed the high priest. It was mixed into the grain offerings. And it was the oil used in the anointing of the kings of Israel from Saul to Solomon. The Zohar teaches that the olive tree is unique among all trees because it does not give up its essence easily. The oil must be pressed, extracted through pressure, and that this process mirrors the spiritual principle that the deepest light emerges through difficulty. The Hebrew word for olive, zayit, shares its root with the word for light in certain Kabbalistic commentaries, though the connection is mystical rather than grammatical. My grandfather taught me this when I was a young man, and I have spent decades sitting with it. Now let me share with you what the tradition actually teaches about how this oil works. And I want to be generous here because this is real knowledge, ancient knowledge, and it belongs to you. The first principle is what I call the principle of the pressed light. The Talmud in Tractate Menachot, page 53, side B, states that just as the olive produces light only through being pressed, so too does the wisdom of Israel emerge through the pressure of exile and difficulty. This is not merely a metaphor about Jewish history. The Kabbalists of Tzfat, the school my grandfather carried and transmitted to me, understood this as a teaching about the nature of the oil itself. When you consume olive oil that has been cold-pressed, crushed under weight, extracted with minimal heat, maintaining its full living essence, you are consuming something that carries within it the energetic signature of transformation. You are taking in light that emerged through pressure. And the tradition teaches that the body recognizes this. The Rambam, Maimonides, in his Mishneh Torah and in his medical writings, specifically recommended olive oil as the foundational fat for what he called a healthy and balanced constitution. He understood, drawing from both Torah and the medical wisdom of his time, that olive oil sustained the body's vital functions in a way no other fat could. He was a physician and a rabbi. He did not separate those roles. For him, the body and the soul were governed by the same divine intelligence, and olive oil served both. The second principle is what I call the principle of illuminated memory. The Talmud in Tractate Horiot, page 13, side B, lists olive oil among the substances that sharpen the mind and strengthen memory. This is a direct Talmudic statement, not a mystical interpretation. It appears in a practical discussion about which foods a Torah scholar should make part of his regular diet. For 43 years, I have watched what this teaching means in practice. The families in Tzfat who maintain the traditional use of olive oil, not merely as a condiment but as the primary fat in their kitchens, used daily, used intentionally, used as my grandfather used it. Those families carried a sharpness into their 70s and 80s that I have not seen replicated in people who abandoned the practice. The Zohar explains this through the concept of the neshama, the soul, which is described in Kabbalistic teaching as a flame. A flame needs oil to burn. When you nourish your body with the oil that lit the menorah, you are, in a spiritual sense, feeding the flame of your own consciousness. This is not metaphor. The Kabbalists of Tzfat understood it as a literal teaching about the relationship between physical nourishment and spiritual vitality. The practical application of this principle is simpler than people expect. My grandfather never cooked at high heat with olive oil, not because he followed modern nutritional advice, but because the tradition taught him that heat destroys the living quality of the oil, the same quality that made it suitable for the menorah. He used it raw, over vegetables, over bread after Shabbat blessings, stirred into warm but not boiling dishes. And he used it in a specific minimum, a generous pour, not a drop. The Talmud does not reward scarcity with this food. This is one of the 7 divine foods, and it is meant to be present, to be felt, to be tasted fully. The third principle, and this is what my grandfather taught our family privately, is what he called the principle of the intentional vessel. Before using olive oil in his kitchen, my grandfather would take a moment, just a moment, to acknowledge what he was holding. He would sometimes whisper a short phrase in Hebrew, Baruch atah Adonai, Mishane et habriot. Blessed are you, Lord, who makes all creation different and distinct. This is not the standard blessing over food. It is a blessing traditionally said upon encountering something remarkable in the natural world. He had learned it from his own teacher in Tzfat, as specifically appropriate for the moment of receiving one of the Shivat HaMinim with full awareness. What does this practice do? The Zohar teaches that human intention has the capacity to elevate or diminish the spiritual quality of what we receive. When we receive the divine foods without awareness, we receive only their physical dimension. When we receive them with full presence, with the recognition that this food is a carrier of blessing specifically designated by the Torah, we open a channel to receive the full dimension of what that food can give. This principle becomes part of the complete system only when you understand how the 7 sacred foods interact with each other. What the olive oil opens, the other 6 sustain and amplify. My grandfather spent his entire life organizing these 7 teachings into a complete system. It took me decades to understand how deeply they connect. I want to be honest with you about something. There was a period in my life, my late 40s after my grandfather had passed, when I allowed grief to become an excuse to step away from these practices. I told myself that I was keeping the knowledge alive by teaching it, but I was not fully living it. I was explaining the fire without sitting in its warmth, and I noticed, gradually, that something in my own vitality had dimmed, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a candle dims when the oil runs low. It took a conversation with a student, a young woman from Miami who had come to study with me and who asked me one afternoon why I looked tired in my eyes, to wake me up. I went home that evening and returned, quietly, to the practices my grandfather had given me. Within weeks, something had shifted. I do not share this to be dramatic. I share it because I think many of us know the gap between what we teach and what we live. And I think the olive oil specifically is a teacher in this regard, because you cannot receive what it carries if you are not present enough to receive anything at all. The world we live in now is one of profound confusion about what sustains life. We are surrounded by processed food that mimics nourishment without providing it, by oils that have been refined into substances that bear no resemblance to what was pressed from the sacred fruit. The ancient knowledge of the Jewish kitchen, the understanding that the quality, the source, the context, and the intention surrounding food are all part of what that food gives you. This knowledge is not historical curiosity. It's urgently needed right now in this century, in this generation. What I have shared with you today represents one piece of a larger teaching, one of the 7 divine foods of the Shivat HaMinim, the sacred system that my grandfather dedicated his life to preserving. The olive and its oil are the 4th of the 7 in the Deuteronomy verse, but they are in many ways the entry point to the whole system, because olive oil is the substance that runs through all the others. It was combined with grain for the temple offerings. It was pressed from the fruit that represents peace. It is the bridge. Once you truly understand this food, not just what it does to your body, but what it represents, what it opens, what covenant you are participating in when you receive it with intention, the other six become available to you in a new way. My grandfather spent decades organizing this complete teaching. In my next video, I will share another of the 7 sacred foods. One, he told me, was the most misunderstood in all of Torah, a food that almost every family in the world already has in their home and uses in completely the wrong way. You will not want to miss that teaching. If this has resonated with you today, please share it with someone whose health and home you care about. Subscribe to this channel and ring the notification bell so you do not miss the next teaching in the series. And write in the comments below. Tell me, do you use olive oil in your home? Have you ever thought about it the way we have spoken about it today? I read every comment. I want to know your story. Shabbat Shalom. Until next time.